The millionaire rancher found the girl hiding beneath a pile of old blankets just before midnight. Elias Mercer had returned to his barn because he heard a horse kicking against its stall. He carried a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other, expecting a thief. Instead, he found a young woman curled behind the hay, soaked from the rain and trembling from cold. "Come out," Elias said. The girl slowly raised her face. She could not have been more than 22. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, her boots were covered in mud, and she held a small leather satchel tightly against her chest. "I'm not stealing anything," she whispered. "Then why are you hiding in my barn?" She looked toward the open barn doors where rain swept across the dark ranch yard. "Because if they find me, they'll take my mother's house." Elias lowered the revolver. "What's your name?"
Clara Bell.
The name struck him strangely, though he could not understand why. He had heard hundreds of names in his 40 years, but something about hers made him pause. "Who are they?" Clara swallowed. "Men from the land office. They say my mother owed money. They say the ranch she left me belongs to someone else." Elias studied her carefully. "Your mother's name?" "Margaret Bell." The lantern trembled slightly in his hand. Margaret Bell. He had not heard that name in 23 years. "Where is your mother?" he asked. Clara looked down. "She died 3 months ago." For a long moment only the rain answered. Elias had built his fortune from nothing. His cattle covered thousands of acres, his barns were full, and merchants in 3 towns owed him respect. Yet no amount of money had ever filled the quiet house where his wife had died 12 years earlier. He had learned to live with silence. But that night, standing in the barn with Margaret Bell's daughter, the silence suddenly felt different. He gave Clara a blanket and brought her into the ranch house. She expected suspicion. Instead, Elias placed a bowl of hot stew before her. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we'll find out who is trying to take your land." Clara looked at him. "Why would you help me?" "I don't know yet." It was the truth. The next morning, Elias rode with Clara toward the small Bell homestead. Nearly 30 miles from his ranch, the house stood beside a dry creek, with a broken fence and a field gone brown from neglect. Clara unlocked the door. Inside were only a few pieces of furniture, a cold fireplace and dozens of carefully stacked boxes. She opened one. Old photographs filled it. Elias glanced down. Then he froze. One photograph showed Margaret as a young woman standing beside a man. Elias recognized immediately. Himself. Clara noticed his expression. "You know him?" Elias did not answer. The photograph had been taken 23 years earlier, when he was still a poor ranch hand working on a cattle spread north of town. Margaret had been the school teacher. They had been young, foolish, and deeply in love. But Margaret had disappeared without explanation. Elias had searched for her for months. Then one day he learned she had married another man. He never knew why. He had buried the memory and built a different life. "Your mother never told you about me?" he finally asked. Clara shook her head. "She said there was a man she loved once. She never told me his name." Elias stared at the photograph. "Did she leave any letters?" Clara hesitated. "One." She pulled a folded envelope from the bottom of the box. The paper was old and yellow. Elias recognized Margaret's handwriting before he even opened it. The letter began with his name. "Elias, if you're reading this, then I failed to tell you the truth when I had the chance." He read in silence. Margaret had not left him willingly. Years earlier, Elias's employer, Silas Crow, had discovered that Elias planned to leave and start his own ranch. Crow threatened Margaret's younger brother, who owed a large gambling debt. He told Margaret that if she married Elias, her brother would be sent to prison and her family would lose everything. Margaret believed the threat. She left town and married Thomas Bell, a kind widower who later became Clara's father. But there was something else. Margaret had been pregnant when she left. Clara was Elias's daughter. Elias lowered the letter. The room seemed to tilt beneath him. Clara watched his face. "What does it say?" He looked at her. For 22 years he had believed he had lost the only woman he ever loved. He had never known he had a daughter. "I think," he said slowly, "your mother wanted me to know you were mine." Clara stepped backward. "No." Elias did not move. "My father was Thomas Bell." "Your mother loved him," Elias said. "She wrote that he raised you and loved you as his own. But she also said I was your father." Clara covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. For years she had believed her mother had simply refused to speak about her past. Now she understood the silence had been a sacrifice. But the letter contained another secret. Margaret had written that the men trying to take Clara's property were connected to Silas Crow. Crow had died years earlier, but his son, Vernon Crow, now controlled the local land office. The Bell property contained water rights that could supply half the valley. Vernon did not want the land because Clara owed money. He wanted it because he could sell the water rights for a fortune, and he had already forged papers claiming Clara had abandoned the property. Elias clenched his jaw. He is not getting it. Clara looked at him through tears. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Because I'm your daughter? Elias looked away. No, because you're Margaret's daughter. I would have helped you even if you weren't. That answer broke something inside Clara. She had spent 3 months believing she had nobody left. Now a stranger was standing before her, offering her something she had never expected. A father. But Vernon Crow was not finished. That afternoon, 2 riders arrived at Elias's ranch carrying a legal notice ordering Clara to surrender the Bell property. Behind them stood Vernon himself. He was dressed in a clean black coat, smiling as if he had already won. You should stay out of this, Mercer, Vernon said. Elias stepped onto the porch. You forged those papers. Can you prove it? Elias looked toward Clara. Not yet. Vernon smiled. Then perhaps you should ask your new daughter why she ran away from her own home. Clara went pale. Elias turned toward her. What does he mean? Clara lowered her head. I found the forged papers 3 weeks ago. Vernon's men came looking for me. I took the originals and ran. She opened her satchel. Inside was a bundle of documents. The original land deed, receipts, a list of payments, and a small notebook. Elias opened it. The notebook belonged to Vernon's clerk. Every illegal payment was recorded. Names, dates, amounts, everything. Vernon's smile disappeared. You little fool, he whispered. Elias stepped between them. She isn't alone anymore. The next morning, Elias rode into town with Clara and the documents. The sheriff had known Vernon for years and seemed reluctant to act. Then Clara placed Margaret's letter on the desk. At the bottom was a name, Silas Crow. The sheriff read the letter twice. Then he looked at Vernon. You're finished. Vernon tried to leave. The sheriff stopped him. By sunset, the town knew the truth. The Bell property belonged to Clara. The forged papers were destroyed. The water rights remained hers. But the greatest battle was not in the courtroom. It was in the old farmhouse that evening. Clara stood beside the fireplace, holding her mother's photograph. I don't know how to call you, she said. Elias stood quietly. You don't have to call me anything. I spent my whole life wondering why my mother never talked about my father. She was afraid. She shouldn't have been. Elias nodded. No, she shouldn't. Clara looked at him. Are you angry with her? He thought about the lonely years, the unanswered questions, and the life he might have had. Then he looked at the photograph again. No. He folded the letter carefully. She made the wrong choice for the right reason. Clara began to cry. Elias did something he had never learned to do easily. He opened his arms. She stepped into them. For the first time in 22 years, Elias held the child he had never known. Weeks passed. Clara repaired her mother's house, but she did not stay there alone. She began spending mornings at Elias's ranch, learning about cattle, horses, accounts, and the hard work behind his fortune. Elias learned something too. Money could buy land. It could buy cattle. It could build a larger house, but it could never buy back the years he had missed. So he stopped trying to recover the past. Instead, he began building something new. One evening, as the sun turned the prairie gold, Clara stood beside him on the ranch porch. You know, she said, Mother always told me that sometimes the people we lose are not really gone. They leave something behind. Elias smiled. What did she leave behind? Clara looked at him. Me. He looked across the fields where horses moved slowly beneath the evening sky. No, he said softly. She left us both. Clara leaned against his shoulder. The ranch was still quiet. The past could not be changed. Margaret could not return. 22 lost years could never be recovered. But beneath the wide western sky, A father and daughter finally had the one thing neither had known they were missing, a second chance. And from that day forward, Elias Mercer never again believed that the greatest fortune a man could own was measured in acres, cattle, or gold. Because sometimes, after a lifetime of loneliness, the greatest fortune arrives in the shape of someone who was already yours and simply needed to find her way home.